IARPC call or haven't been in a while, I thought it'd be essentially to do a quick overview of what the IARPC is and what the data team is focused on and what the point of the meeting is today. So I'm going to breeze through it because we do have limited time and lots to talk about. I'm very happy to see the Arctic Data Center, NSF Arctic Data Center, a few representatives there that at a recent social science data workshop. Very good. You're on the agenda. It'd be great to talk about some next steps. I think it really makes sense for this group to integrate with any planned next steps where it makes sense. So very glad that you guys could join. So very briefly, and most everyone here knows, but to remind everyone to orient to this meeting, the Federal Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, IARPC, is charged with enhancing both the scientific monitoring and research on local, regional, and global environmental issues in the Arctic. The IARPC established the IARPC collaborations to connect federal and non-federal government researchers and stakeholders to address hard problems that are defined in the IARPC 5-year plan. So this team, the Arctic Data Team, is one of 12 collaborations teams. It's a sub-team of the Environmental Intelligence Team. And that's important because in our performance areas, we kind of gravitate towards that use-inspired, actionable, prominent, important theme of environmental intelligence. So I'm very new to the team, so this is helpful for me to orient and learn what the IARPC is about, what this team is about. But it's been great to start working with Jonathan Blythe. We've been starting to shape up a standing theme to kind of keep a consistent focus with future calls and other activities going forward. So I think the best way to summarize what we've been talking about, kind of a really high level, is enhancing access and usability to Arctic data holdings. Obviously very broad, but two main themes that we've kind of been getting into. One, high level kind of policy approach. So a policy is like, what's the role of the Evidence Act of 2018 on enhancing access and usability. The federal data strategy. Jonathan's been very terrific about keeping us up to date with what's going on there. And also, obviously usability is going to be a part of those policy elements, but really pulling out the CoProduction method as being, the state of the art, kind of moving in this direction of enhancing usability and actionability of data, information, and science that are coming out of this data. That said, my kind of value add that I've been thinking about bringing to this group is actively reaching out to practitioners to include them in conversations about Arctic data resources and requirements, in addition to scientists, which are obviously very important voices in the IARPC collaboration calls. So this meeting in particular, it's good that we have people that are looking to check in to see what some updates are, because we don't have a guest speaker like we normally do. We decided to kind of focus on some of the internal activities. We've been doing some recent engagements, and then kind of checking in on what our purpose is, thinking about looking forward to our contribution to shaping the upcoming 5-year plan. So checking in, what are we doing and where are we going? And we want to include this community in that conversation to shape our recommendations to that 5-year IARPC plan that's coming up. Deadline is 2 July. Each of these calls will be centered on a topic, but we want to keep it open, make sure that this group, everyone on the call, has a voice and is thinking about how they can shape our input from a data perspective into that 5-year plan. So we'll get more to that at the end, where we bring in the group into discussion. But so just a little orientation, what we're here for. Again, access, usability is kind of that main overarching theme we've been working on. And then we have a list of recent data team engagements that we thought it makes sense to update on, and then kind of reflect on, that hopefully contribute to some next steps, calls, and also thinking about input for the upcoming 5-year plan. So I put together a few notes. These are nuts and bolts of recent engagements, and then I asked Jonathan to bring in some substance from a data perspective, so main takeaways from some of these important engagements. The Arctic Observing Summit 2020 occurred 31 March to April. Originally, it was planned to occur, in person in Iceland, but it was moved to virtual due to the COVID-19 response, as many meetings adapted. There were over 350 participants from 28 countries, including 40 indigenous representatives. And I'm really interested to see how, how those numbers compare to normal situations where there wasn't virtual options. And I want to, I'd be interested in particular, the indigenous participation, how that's kind of, how that compares to previous Arctic observing summits. So high level highlights, the Iceland Minister of Education, Science and Culture spoke. And she and the Arctic Observing Summit lead, Hayo Aiken, had a nice, I thought it was terrific public discussion on how to best shape the AOS call to action to kind of enhance the impact on the upcoming third Arctic Science Ministerial that's going to occur in Tokyo in November. And my takeaway, and others that were on there, I'd be curious what you thought, but from this Iceland Science Minister is basically keep it short. It's hard for science to do, but you got to keep it short, and keep it on topic with current interest, including the obvious COVID-19 policy responses. Somehow weave that in. And also, the minister was particularly keen on capacity building through science education. And this capacity building a theme came up a lot, coincidentally, for good reason, in the Arctic Observing Summit itself. So this is something I think is important to highlight to this group, is that local community needs was a prominent theme in AOS 2020. In this Observing Summit, the local communities partners were oftentimes referred to as the users and or partners in Arctic observing networks, which I really like to see. Many on this call know that in the past, and obviously now, there's been this kind of evolving methods or approaches to optimizing or in designing these observing networks. And one of those, among many approaches, has been this stakeholder-based approach to optimizing observing networks. So tapping into those partner stakeholder priorities and values, and making sure that the observing systems for science, primarily for science, also address those stakeholder needs, at least in the process in some form, whether information peel-off being useful to meet community needs, or the science itself being useful for the stakeholders. So indigenous food security was really the focus of that community need, to delimit what are we talking about when we can't talk about everything in one meeting. And they made it very clear that, let's take a holistic view of this issue. Obviously, food security is very important, but it's also connected to every social environmental stressor occurring in the Arctic. So it opened the door to really every other topic. Just let's come back to food security as the main societal kind of benefit area to focus on. Something I noted as coming from a federal agent, U.S. federal agency, is that non-indigenous science partners, their priorities and values they're either de-emphasized or not really highlighted in the meeting. And this is something that's like a deviation from we heard about some of the European similar observing network programs, where they're really more integrated with some non-indigenous stakeholder partners, such as vessel operators in the region, for example. So there were several working groups that convened in plenary throughout the virtual workshop. I thought it was amazing what they did. I couldn't believe how well we were kind of going to breakout groups and then come back together in plenary. I don't recall all the working groups. I participated mainly in two of them. There was an adaptation working group and also a data working group. And the data group was led by Peter Pulsifer. He's former IARPIC data team co-lead. I'm sure everyone here has heard that name. It was terrific. It was a phenomenal job the way he handled that virtually. And so there are two products come out of AOS 2020 that I heard about. So there's a call of action, which generally comes out of the AOS meetings. That's gonna be a longer brief, 3-4 pages. How do we move this community forward for the science priorities that were identified? And then also a brief policy statement geared towards that third Arctic Science Ministerial. Again, trying to align with immediate policy issues like COVID-19 response. So Jonathan, do you want to add any more flesh to that takeaway from a data perspective?
Yeah, I'm just looking at some notes here from the data breakouts. And one thing that was highlighted is the Arctic Data Committee, which Peter is still the chair of, is being proposed as a venue for us to coordinate on a variety of these issues with Arctic observing data in the future. And so I think we should be totally supportive about that. It's an international venue, and the Arctic's a international place, so it makes sense. Also, just looking at where these things might be hosted, it's probably the most logical place to put this coordination. So what we'll need to think about in our group, the IARPIC data collaboration team, is how we feed into that, what other US agencies or organizations might need to be involved. And something else that was a focus was Bill Manley's proposal for observing asset coordination, and really looking at developing a vision and actually a platform for sharing that information for the Arctic. And that's also a working group that stood up recently and is starting to come to a full boil, so to speak. So those are just two of the outcomes from that data breakout. And they're working on the report from culminating the notes into a report for AOS. So let's be looking forward to that when that comes out.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So I'm gonna breeze through these. We do have the NSF Arctic Data Center, some representatives here online. So I'm gonna breeze through that, and I do want to try to return to that in a discussion later. So just for everyone's awareness, April 21 and 22, the National Science Foundation Arctic Data Center held a workshop on how to enhance reuse of social science data in the Arctic. There were around 27 participants, representing mostly academia, but also there was some government and private sector that participated. IARPIC Environmental Intelligence Team Co-Lead Colleen Strawhacker was also in attendance, in addition to Jonathan, IARPIC Data Team Co-Lead, and myself. The focus was on, again, reusing Arctic social science data. It was organized into 3 working groups that reported each day in a plenary. It was a short meeting, and it was incredible how much really we got done. I thought anyway. So the 3 groups were, and I suspect these are the 3 themes that are kind of going to be unpackaged as we move forward with next steps and impacts from that meeting. But first working group focused on supporting social science research through data science training. Second group focused on culture of data sharing in the social sciences. And the third focused on data preservation and sharing infrastructure for the social science community. So there was discussion on, what some of the outcomes of this meeting. There's some talk about potential white paper, and then a lot of discussion about a potential academic paper coming out. And we'll be sure, as the IARPIC data team, to make sure that any projects that come out of that get funneled into at least, posted on the IARPIC website. But we also want to be sure to invite the Arctic Data Center for a readout to really get, a focused attention in this community that reaches out to a lot of practitioners in U.S. federal government, especially. And that was one kind of feedback that I tried to insert was, the scope is reuse of Arctic social science, but of course, most of us are scientists. The focus was really on, reusability for science. But of course, especially, coming out of the Arctic Observing Summit, this focus on multiple uses of these observations and data that come out, we really have to think about broader stakeholders, including practitioners, when designing these data steward platforms and infrastructure and the metadata. So what are some thoughts on, what to include in metadata that will let a practitioner know that is fit for use for their particular, say, land use decision making or policy making. So just some thoughts that I contribute as a U.S. federal government participant, but we do have ADC people on the line. I want to get through the rest, and then I want to hopefully bring them in for discussion on next steps, if that's okay. Unless there's something burning, okay, great. So in the kind of in the spirit of reaching out to practitioners, relevant practitioners that at least I have access to for that co-production method, I wanted to sort of to kind of cross-fertilize and at least update this group on relevant practitioner-centric fora that do kind of engage with federal research, just to make sure you're aware, to hopefully identify some areas of overlap to partner and advance that co-production model. So first, Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission. I participate extensively with the International Hydrographic Organization. This region, the ARHC, is one of 15 International Hydrographic Organization regional commissions that were established to coordinate hydrographic activity at the regional scale. Currently, NOAA Rear Admiral Shep Smith, the director of Ocean Coast Survey, chairs that region. Yesterday, the ARHC held an intersessional meeting. They normally meet once a year, but they checked in midway this time, and in attendance were the hydrographic authorities, usually admirals or equivalent. So we had representatives from Canada, Denmark, Norway, United States, Finland, Iceland, and Italy in attendance on that one. I was originally planning to be in Monaco. I was going to be in Monaco last week, but that was one of the, another meeting that got postponed due to COVID-19. Among the topics discussed yesterday that I thought was particularly, this group should know, is there's a lot to talk about the UN decade on ocean science. So that's something I think that we should potentially open dialogue. I know that the IARPC engages this group, especially through the Committee on the Marine Transportation System, which I'll touch on next. But I don't think those conversations really trickle down to this kind of collaboration team level. So I think I can do a little work to kind of do some basic updates there. So. One theme that came up in the context of the UN decade is Arctic ocean mapping. Obviously, is the hydrography group, state-based. So I'm thinking now, maybe it makes sense for the data team to propose to the IARPC to include bathymetry data or seafloor data into the IARPC 5-year plan. So map the gaps. Lots of gaps in ocean mapping, especially in the Arctic. So the next ARHC meeting is scheduled to take place in Anchorage, Alaska. That's going to be 10 to 14 August. The first 2 days are intentionally, we're meant to overlap with the Arctic Science Forum. There, in the Arctic, is particular interest in engaging science communities and especially local communities. That's one way that the Arctic Regional Commission is distinct from the rest of the region. They're really interested in responsibly interacting with the local communities as they carry out their charting strategies and activities. So that meeting was originally supposed to involve a meeting in Nome, where they were going to bring in some of the local community partners, including the Alaska Whaling Commission. But due to COVID-19 and concerns, I mean, I'm sure everyone's been hearing about this, about the potential of bringing that into these vulnerable communities. Nome asked us that we not hold a portion of that meeting there. So we're going to do it all in Anchorage. And my question is still, how are we going to have the local community voice in that meeting? And so the Committee on the Marine Transportation System, again, trying to bring in cross-seat a bit with some of the practitioners that are relevant. The CMTS is it's an interagency policy. It's an interagency forum that recommends policy to improve the maritime transportation systems. It's a cabinet level committee. Like IARPC, they have these collaboration teams or working groups or task teams called integrative action teams that focus on a topic. Like IARPC, they have CONOS fellows that do a lot of the work, kind of the glue, really advancing these efforts. The CMTS does have an Arctic integrated action team. They most recently met on 21 April to discuss Arctic communication and other maritime transportation infrastructure. Many here may be aware that the CMTS Arctic team put out a 10-year vessel traffic report, which got a lot of publicity. Now they're shifting, they've been looking at another really shifting focus to Arctic infrastructure, including communication. And I think most relevant for this group is local community, civil access to shore-to-shore communication. So this is key. So they're starting to really look at, better enhancing vessel operator communication with local communities, including subsistence hunters. Obviously, for many reasons, One being to deconflict the waterways, subsistence transversing operator lanes, and also research-related activities such as charting and other marine spatial planning activities. So one thing I want to propose to this group, just kind of go a lot of notes here. So there are many ways to think about communication infrastructure. And so far, my sense is that team is really focused on the basic things, like how does a research vessel notify a community effectively that are going to be in the area? Still a challenge. Obviously, many here know that. But coming from a geospatial background, I think about things like, how do you communicate with data? How do you communicate with automatic identification system, AIS data? So that leads me to think, wouldn't it be interesting to start maybe hosting some conversations through the ARPIC platform here to get some local community perspectives on what the value would be to getting better access to that AIS ship traffic information. This is not a new concept, but that's just kind of me thinking, this is obviously part of that communication infrastructure. And others are thinking about that too. How do we, if we know where the ships are going and we can see where the hunting activities, that can, if it's in the hands of the local communities, having that information on hand could be useful for enhancing the way they interact with the growing maritime activity around them. So that I want to set up for thinking about future plans. I'll just getting into the next bullet here. And this is where I want to try to bring in, we want to try to bring in the community to this discussion, what we want to do going forward. I do have a secured speaker for 28 May. That's the next data team call. She's terrific. She's with the Army Corps of Engineers, and she's really excited about sharing the AIS tools that she actively tries to engage people, including local communities, to use. It's terrestrial based, mainly coastal US waters. She's very keen on getting involved in training. She proactively works with interesting use cases to make sure that you get access to the data the way you need it. There's both power user and kind of lighter weight web-based tools that the users can interact with, and she will work with those users to develop the capability. So she doesn't really do much in the Arctic, so I said, wouldn't it be great to just hear an overview of your AIS resource, which is used a lot by the U.S. Coast Guard, and then also bring in, hand select some people that can talk to some use cases particular to the Arctic. So thinking about like how can something like this be leveraged more fully in the Arctic context. I'd be particularly interested in how does this really expensive, really difficult to access, incredible resources that's now you're seeing explosion in space-based automatic identification systems. How do you get, would it be interesting to see how that interacts with the local communities? What would it look like to get that in their hands? And what would that open up in terms of better communication and operating more responsibly in the region, doing research better in the region? So I'll stop talking there. Jonathan, thanks for letting me get through all that. I just wanted to kind of inject that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I wanted to make a note on your last topic. This came up during AOS, I believe, that we're requiring, when there's surveying occurring, the Royal We are requiring operators to notify the local communities at least, and that's part of, that's like a token, but started giving them sovereignty over the environmental information we're collecting in their region, in the Arctic region. The inhabitants should know what's going on around them. And part of AOS was about that data sovereignty, which to me is a very interesting but new topic. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And but yeah, it seems to be worth thinking about more.
Yeah,
so
certainly not a new topic, but I think I'd love to hear from the group here, especially those social, like when I hear about communication, notifying, that is just not even the beginning for good communication with operating in the Arctic. So that's something I want to put on the agenda for discussion if we want to lay into that. I know we have some social science line.
Yeah, the sovereignty gets into who owns the data after it's been collected. So just keeping people informed is arguably the first step and the lowest level of collaboration that could occur. it's a new topic to me anyways. I think it's really interesting. So I think we're going to move on to future plans, right? Okay, so I can, since Mike, I'll give Mike a breathing break. Good job, Mike, on those notes. What we're looking at here, this is to discuss our ARPIC's data subteam's plans. And in particular, we have plans to collect input for the next 5-year plan, with plans for planning. But more specifically, over the next 6 months or so, we're going to be alternating the kinds of engagement we do on these meetings. So Mike has been advocating for doing practitioner-based engagement, or what we could also consider external. But I was really happy to see Olivia and others who are like co-leads and very active in other IARPIC teams calling in, because this is another topic that we'll be focusing at least half of our time, is reaching out, looking at performance elements in the current 5-year plan for these other teams, and seeing how data is central to achieving that. You know, I have a sneaking suspicion that regardless of what the end goal is, data is a common theme throughout the entire IARPIC enterprise. And so that could help us get kind of, I wouldn't call it a baseline, but kind of a snapshot of what we're doing in IARPIC. And it could be something that the data team owns and maintains. And as we go into the next 5-year plan, we can kind of maintain that snapshot, maybe continue it. So that was my, grand planning for the next 6 months. So please, other teams, people who are participating in other teams, please reach out to us if you have an idea or want to co-lead a team meeting on a specific topic. I'm also particularly aware that both myself and Michael are marine focused in our day jobs, and IARPIC's supposed to be terrestrial and atmospheric. So I'm really happy to hear about it. The guy from NOAA Pacific office who's interested in the atmospheric dynamics, and trying to understand that broader, those other domains. We really have to get a hold of those and bring that into our planning, because we don't have that necessarily that subject matter expertise. So we'll be really relying on other people for that. And Mike, do you have any other thoughts on our data team plan?
No, I'll just reiterate what you already said and make sure it's clear to the group. So, we're not really going to hold fast always to this, but in general, we want to try to alternate these calls at least between more internal outreach, making sure we're actively reaching out to our cohort team leads and keeping that data for science conversation going. And then on alternate months, I'm really going to try to reach out to external partners to bring in people that normally don't participate in the IARPIC, focusing on practitioner perspectives that have an interest in U.S. Federal research.
I guess there's one more point I'll bring up before we move on, is there's something that also came out of the AOS meeting, the data subgroup. They're really interested in the co-production model as well. And we've been discussing that concept. Is it production of data? What is it, the systems that have data or display them? What are we co-producing? And I think that's going to be a healthy discussion, definitely between Mike and myself, but I'd like to see it be a discussion along the lines of every team meeting we have, and seeing how we can move towards a model where we're engaging with the user base, with the decision makers who might use that information, the general public, in helping us to come up with the best tools and data that we can. So that's my last point on that topic. we want to move on.
I think we are moved on. This is, Jonathan and I gave you a little bit to chew on. We have a lot of great people on the line. Thanks so much for everyone taking the time to join us today. Now is the time we just want to kind of open it up. Reactions to what we're talking about. These are big issues, long-standing, enduring challenges, effectively communicating with local indigenous partners in the context of an opening Arctic. This is something I know, seeing the names on this roster here, many have a lot to say about that. And just your input on what do you think we should do, the Arctic Data Team. This is a kind of open season for revisiting the theme, the organizing theme going forward. What do you want from us? We want to capture that and build that into the Arctic Data Team's recommendation to the IARPC as input to shape that 5-year plan. Again, that's due July 2nd, so we'll continue this conversation going the next couple of calls. But right now, what are your thoughts? What's your reaction to the co-production method? I don't think, some people say it's a buzzword. I think it's, especially in the context of environmental intelligence, if you want actionable data science information, you've got to engage the users, whether they be more kind of a research science context or an end user operator. And then also thinking, by the way, we're all smart people. We have lots of resources, but we shouldn't be focusing on designing data science information just for a single cause. This opens up the multiple uses, that concept that's so prominent in the Arctic because resources are limited. We have to share, and that's not just sharing data, making metadata so it's designed to also inform non-science users. But it's also sharing resources between industry, private industry, science, observing resources. That's something that comes up in the Arctic observing community. We also have to think about that at the data level, where it really, in many cases, the rubber hits the ground, is that users are using data. Let's design it and make it accessible and usable for more than one purpose. So how do you build that into like metadata design? The design of data stewardship platforms and infrastructure, like the Arctic Data Center. And I do want to, so something I meant to say, so the Arctic Data Center Social Science Workshop, it was hosted by the Arctic Data Center, but it was, the topics were much more broader to, data steward infrastructure more generally, both physical and social infrastructure. So policy also entered that conversation. So I have ideas how I'd like to at least include Arctic Data Center into conversations going forward, at least a readout from that social science workshop, maybe to help, facilitate a better partnership going forward. I think it makes sense with IARPC, but I have some specific ideas moving forward potentially with the recommendations for the IARPC 5-year plan to maybe in some form explicitly include Arctic Data Center into that recommendation. For example, it would be great to weave into these calls, how do you manage data, and it would be great to include the Arctic Data Center that can really inform that and say, well, these are the processes, the procedures for managing data. These are some of the challenges we run up against. Really hone in on some of these specific challenges and opportunities to help really sharpen that conversation in the IARPC data team forum, and obviously there's connections with Arctic Observing and environmental intelligence groups as well. So those are some things I have in mind. I'm really looking forward to what comes of that Arctic Data Center working group. I should have mentioned that social science is a small sliver of the holdings there, and that wasn't surprising. I think he said around 100, Aaron McLean, I think it was you, said around 100 people or 100 social science data holdings versus thousands of physical sciences. So I think we really, social science is important in the Arctic. We really got to cultivate anything that comes out of that conversation. So open floor.
Yeah, I suppose I can just jump in for a sec. We'd love to collaborate on whatever would be helpful for IARPC. It would be a very strong partnership for us to have with you guys. I'm happy, like, as the community outreach person, like, I'm happy to make myself available for any sort of discussion that you or any other users may have about how to steward data or how to access our holdings. I'm happy to give a talk to the ARPIC data team. Pretty much whatever you need, I'm more than happy to offer my assistance with that. In terms of the social science workshop, our way forward right now, I'm working on getting a summary together, which I'll then send to the organizers for their review. Then I'll send it out to participants for review. So hopefully I will have more of that within the next week or two for you guys.
Sounds good. It would really, it would be great to have a readout. One of these calls going, whenever you're ready. The topic isn't going away. But I think it's an obvious next step to do a verbal readout and, outreach for what you're doing and what the plan is going forward.
So Mike and Jonathan, this is Molly McCammon, and I'm director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System, which is part of the IUS program. And we have an Alaska Ocean Data Center that has a large amount of holdings. Our focus is on all real-time data and models, and then also on information products. And so we do have an integrated database of all the AIS data that is searchable, and we have a commitment to keeping that updated on a regular basis. But one of the things I wanted to kind of insert here, I'm also one of the co-leads of the Environmental Intelligence Collaboration Team. And for the past couple of years, we have really focused on the rapid change in the Bering Sea, Bering Strait region as our kind of our primary topic. So I think, I don't know exactly where we're going to go for the next 5-year plan, but my guess is that we're going to still continue with that as our focus. And so I think the Arctic Data Collaboration Team, your team, I think it'd be really great to have some greater connection between the activities that you're doing and some of your goals and your action plans for the next 5 years relate to what we're doing with the Environmental Intelligence writ large team. And then also, I think the focus of IARPIC has always been on the research committee, and naturally so, because it is the research policy committee. But it has been focused, I think, more on research and academia, and not as much on kind of operational programs and operational needs. And I think it really can be strengthened by bringing those two kind of communities closer together, so there's not such a bifurcation between them. Another piece, our program did get, AUS did get some of the White House data sharing initiative funding, and we are considered a regional data partnership. And so our focus for that initial 2 years of funding is focusing on Bering Sea, Bering region data sharing. And so we really are focusing on making sure, first of all, that everything that's already been collected is available and accessible through some data portal or through some access point, number one. And then secondly, where are the big gaps in terms of information, decision-making tools, applications, products, and how can we help provide the infrastructure and the data needed for those products. So I think the data team has a really important role to play in that, and really look forward to working with you and helping to shape some of your future actions on that.
That's terrific. And congratulations on getting dedicated resources from that White House initiative.
It's a small amount, but at least it's dedicated for 2 years. So yeah.
That's terrific. And I do, so Molly, this is gonna be my next step after this call. I wanted to touch base with you about that AIS theme for next month. I hope
we could get Ed Page or someone from the Marine Exchange of Alaska, because they run the terrestrial system. And it's the challenge we have here is that everywhere else in the US, the Coast Guard pays for the AIS system, and it's all publicly available. And because that wasn't happening in Alaska, it was started as a subscription service. And so the business model of the AIS system in Alaska is based on subscriptions. And if you make it completely publicly available, then nobody pays their subscription, and then the business model goes away. And so there's real challenges there in terms of making that accessible. And the fact that when you get fishing vessels in the Bering Strait region, they turn their AIS off because they don't want their competitors to know where they are. And they use NOAA's VMS system, which is their vessel monitoring system that fishing vessels are required to have. So NOAA and the Coast Guard see those locations, but they're not through AIS. So there's a number of challenges with the AIS in this region. But I think there's a lot of interest in moving forward with doing something in terms of communication of those where vessels are and better communication there.
That's yeah. I think for many reasons, AIS, automatic identification system, ship tracking data, is it's really it's a great data set to focus on because it's so cross-cutting, and we're still learning what the uses are. And there's current policy interest that specifically calls out AIS as a place to start with these broader U.S. government initiatives to get data more accessible and usable for societal benefit in the public. Recent executive order on ocean management, I don't know the exact title, it's a couple years old now, specifically calls out AIS, specifically mentions the marine cadastre as one of these kind of hubs to access data. And again, one of the reasons being it's such a cross-cutting, valuable data set where it's really, many agencies are going to have a stake and interest in enhancing access to that. And as you know, as many on this call know, there's this ongoing debate about how we, right now, a lot of the AIS holdings are done piecemeal, kind of in silos within individual agencies. How do we make this a more holistic, whole of government process where we're not, buying the same data, same types of data, different agencies? How do we pull that resources? And this really comes down to something that the Committee on the Marine Transportation System has done a terrific job of. How do we identify shared priorities and data needs? And how do we identify the resources? Many times one agency doesn't know that the other agency has the same data. How do we just make it, as part of the discoverability, as part of the accessibility challenge?
Yeah, we discovered there were at least four projects, and I think 3 of them were within NOAA working on AIS data that the others weren't aware of. Yeah. So I should mention, we do have a proposal to NSF. We're part of a small proposal, and if it gets funded or not, but it would be to do a comparison of the terrestrial versus the satellite data, specifically for the Bering Strait region, and to see see how well they compare in terms of what vessels they capture, how accurate they are, and what the benefits might be for terrestrial versus satellite. So that would be, I think, really helpful to have that.
Absolutely. So I am involved with some of the satellite-based AIS development. It's really a private-public partnership challenge that I'm working on, trying to get data out. But I do have a community of interest that are very much involved in the satellite-based AIS. I want to make sure to bring into the conversation. And I think, obviously, an opportunity for partnerships with that project going forward. Obviously, very important to compare. We know that terrestrial-based is much more accurate, but satellite-based covers deep ocean, remote places. So what is the comparison in terms of accuracy specifically? We don't really know, and it varies region to region. So part of what I like to do is just get, again, people that normally don't interact, bring in some of the community around AIS data, the satellite-based, bring it into the IARPIC forum. We know about the AUS resources, but do we know about this Army Corps of Engineers AIS package that is also available for U.S. coastal waters? Maybe some do, maybe some don't, but the whole point is now we've discovered this resource and maybe it's an opportunity for partnerships. I really like the idea with other things that are going on, other themes that are emerging in IARPIC is, what is the local community perspective of the value of the data? So I would love the idea of reaching out to Ed Page. He's a retired Coast Guard officer who's very involved in working with local communities and doing just that. How do we get the ship traffic and information into the hands of the locals? So I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of bring this interest in both local community engagement and IAS. Let's bring them together, focused on these broader federal government challenges with access and usability of Arctic data. So more on that. Jonathan and I are going to work up that agenda after this meeting with some lead time, because I do want to get some outreach done to make sure we get the right people in the room, including individuals like Ed Page that can bring in that local perspective. I even want to maybe reach out to some specific communities that I know are like working on building local capacity to leverage AIS. And I know some people on this call can help with those partnerships. But look for that. We'll be following up soon with many on this call, getting that agenda out. Hopefully you can brainstorm people who should be in, whoever can attend, and looking forward to it. So, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I think you've queued up that topic really well, and keeping in mind there's other people who may have interest in working on future topics. Please reach out to Mike and I, or Anne. Anne's part of the team, and she can definitely direct you to the right people. And hopefully you have our contact information. So I look forward to talking to you guys very soon in the near future at the next month team over the next 6 months as we collect our user or different perspectives, both externally and internally to IARPIC.
Thanks, John. Yeah, reach out. Tell us what you want out of the IARPIC data team, and Jonathan and I will weave that into our statement recommendation for the next IARPIC plan that's due on 2 July. Thank you all. Thanks, Anne, for everything, organizing it.
Okay, thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.